"If you solve this, I'll pay you $800K. Get the money ready," the maid replied. Richard Thompson slammed his fist on the glass dining table, making the expensive porcelain dishes tremble. His company was on the brink of bankruptcy, and not even the most expensive consultants in the country could solve the problem threatening to destroy everything he had built over 20 years. Mrs. Margaret Wilson stopped dusting the bookshelf when she heard the businessman shouting on the phone for the third time that morning. She had worked in that Beverly Hills mansion for 15 years, always discreet, always silent, observing the dramas of that wealthy family who seemed to have everything but no peace. "No, Michael. Don't bother sending me another specialist," Richard yelled into his phone. "I've already spent a fortune on these useless consultants, and none of them can figure out where the mistake in the calculations is." The 62-year-old woman, her graying hair tied in a simple bun, continued her work without showing any sign she was paying attention. But she heard every word. She knew Thompson Engineering was losing million-dollar contracts because something in the projects kept going wrong systematically. "What do you mean there's no solution?" Richard kept shouting. "There has to be. I won't let my company go under because of some stupid mistake no one can find." He hung up with such force he nearly broke the phone. Then he grabbed his silver laptop and threw it onto the kitchen table where Mrs. Margaret was preparing afternoon coffee. The woman flinched at the noise but said nothing. She simply kept stirring sugar into the floral porcelain cup. "Look at this, Margaret." Richard pointed at the screen full of numbers and graphs. 3 months trying to fix this damn thing, and nothing. The best mathematicians in America have already taken a crack at it. He let out a mocking laugh, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and desperation. "If you solve this, I'll pay you $800,000, he shouted, slamming the table again. It was a cruel joke. He knew she had barely finished elementary school. At least that's what he thought. To him, Mrs. Margaret was just another maid who cleaned, cooked, and understood nothing beyond that. The woman stopped stirring the coffee. She looked at the computer screen for a few seconds, then lifted her calm eyes to her employer's red, furious face. "Get the money ready," she said, her voice steady and serene. Richard froze. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. "What did you say?" "I said, get the money ready, Mr. Richard. I'll solve the problem." The businessman let out a loud, cruel laugh. "You? A maid who barely knows how to use a computer is going to solve what the best specialists in the country couldn't?" Margaret didn't answer. She simply walked over to the laptop and started typing. Her fingers moved across the screen with a speed that left Richard speechless. She opened spreadsheets, examined complex formulas, navigated between files with the ease of someone who had been doing it for decades. "How do you—" he started, but his voice died in his throat. "Before working here, I was a university professor of applied mathematics at MIT, Margaret said without looking up from the screen. PhD in differential calculus and an expert in complex systems optimization. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard sank heavily into a chair, still trying to process what he was hearing. But you've been here 15 years cleaning my house. Life sometimes forces us to make choices we wouldn't like, Mr. Richard. When my husband Anthony got sick, I needed quick money for his treatment. I sold our house, used all our savings, went into debt. After he passed, all that was left were the debts and the need to survive. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Margaret kept working on the computer as she spoke, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I tried to go back to the university, but they had already filled my position. And at 60, it's not easy to find work in academia. So I accepted a job as a housekeeper. It was temporary just until I could get back on my feet. But time passed and you stayed here all these years, listening to me treat you like a regular maid. I know. I don't hold a grudge, Mr. Richard. I've learned that pride doesn't pay the bills or feed anyone. Richard ran a hand through his hair, still in shock. In the 15 years she'd worked there, he'd never imagined that behind that simple, quiet woman was one of the brightest minds he'd ever known. Margaret, I had no idea. If I'd known, it wouldn't have changed anything, she gently interrupted. People see what they want to see. A maid's uniform is like an invisibility cloak for intelligence. She kept typing, analyzing data, running calculations that looked like Egyptian hieroglyphics to Richard. "I'll need 3 days to fully solve the problem," she said, "but I can already tell you it's not just a mathematical issue. There's something else going on here." "What do you mean?" "The errors are too specific, too targeted. Someone is intentionally sabotaging the calculations." Richard felt his blood run cold. "Are you saying someone inside my own company is trying to destroy me?" "It's a possibility that needs to be investigated. For now, I'll work on correcting the calculations. We can discuss the rest later." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how he'd underestimated Margaret all those years. How many times had he spoken about her as if she were just the maid? How many times had he treated her as if she were invisible? The next day, he came home early and found Margaret already working on the laptop, surrounded by papers covered in handwritten calculations. "Good morning, Mr. Richard. Coffee's ready." "Margaret, about yesterday, I wanted to apologize for the way I—" "No need, Mr. Richard. Focus on what matters now, saving your company." "So, did you find anything?" "A lot. The problem is more serious than we thought. Someone has privileged access to the files and is altering the data very subtly. It's almost imperceptible, but it causes catastrophic errors in the final results." "But who would have access to those files?" "Very few people. Your secretary, some senior engineers, the accountant, and who else? Your son, Brian." Richard felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Brian was 28 and worked at the company as the financial director. He was his father's pride. Graduated from the best university, smart, ambitious. "Brian would never do something like that. He's my son." "I hope it's just a coincidence, Mr. Richard, but the altered files are always accessed during the hours he's in the office." "That doesn't prove anything. Other people are there at those times too." "You're right. That's why I need to investigate further. Give me 2 more days." Margaret kept working, but now with extra caution. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground. If it really was Brian, Richard would never accept it easily. And if it wasn't, she could be destroying a father-son relationship for no reason. On Monday morning, she arrived early and noticed someone had tampered with the computer over the weekend. Important files had been deleted, passwords changed. Whoever it was, they were trying to sabotage her work. But Margaret hadn't gotten where she was by being careless. All the important data was saved on a flash drive she kept hidden in her uniform pocket, and she had installed a program that logged every system access. "They tried to sabotage my work over the weekend," she told Richard when he arrived. "What do you mean?" "Someone logged into the system and deleted several important files, but I had backed everything up." Richard turned pale. "Who has keys to the house besides us? Your secretary Melissa has a copy, and Brian too." "Margaret, you need to stop this paranoia about my son. Brian would never—" "Then explain how someone got in here early Sunday morning without triggering the alarm or forcing any locks." Richard had no answer. The home security system was sophisticated and could only be disarmed by someone who knew the code. "It could have been Melissa," he said, but his voice sounded unconvincing. "Maybe that's why I installed extra security cameras in the office. If anyone tries to tamper again, we'll know who it is." That afternoon, Margaret was focused on calculations when Brian came home. He greeted his father, but gave her a strange look. "Dad, what's Margaret doing with your computer?" "She's helping me solve the company's problem." Brian laughed mockingly, just as his father had 2 days earlier. "The maid will fix what the best consultants couldn't." "Dad, with all due respect, you're getting desperate." "Margaret was a university professor before working here," Richard explained. Brian's expression changed completely. His smile vanished and he grew visibly nervous. "She was what?" "PhD in applied mathematics from MIT, Margaret replied without looking up from the computer. "Oh, how interesting," Brian stammered. "Well, I'm going up to my room. Up to my—" Margaret and Richard exchanged glances. The young man's behavior had been very odd. That night, the extra cameras Margaret had installed recorded movement in the office. Someone tried accessing the files again, but failed this time since she had changed all the passwords. The next morning, she showed Richard the footage. The quality wasn't great due to the darkness, but a male silhouette could be seen trying to use the computer. "You can't tell who it is," Richard said, though his voice trembled. "Not from the footage. But the program I installed logged the access attempt. They used Brian's old password." Richard sank heavily onto the couch. Margaret saw the pain in his eyes and felt sorry for him. It wasn't easy discovering his own son might be trying to destroy everything he'd built. "Maybe it's just a coincidence," she said gently. "Others could have access to his password." "Margaret, be honest with me. Do you really think my son is sabotaging the company?" The woman took a deep breath before answering. "The data doesn't lie, Mr. Richard, but data can also be misinterpreted. I need more evidence before making any accusations. And if it's true, if it really is Brian, then we need to find out why. A son doesn't do something like this without reason." That afternoon, Margaret decided to talk directly to Brian. She found him in the living room, fiddling with his phone, looking worried. "Brian, can we talk?" "About what?" he replied without looking up. "About the problems at your father's company." Now he looked at her, and Margaret saw fear in the young man's eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about. I know you accessed the files that were altered. I know your password was used to try logging into the system early this morning, and I know you got very nervous when you found out I'm not just an ordinary maid." Brian turned paper white. You're trying to frame me." "I'm trying to understand. If you're doing this, you must have a reason. Do you want to talk to me about it?" For a moment, Brian seemed like he was going to speak. His eyes filled with tears, and he opened his mouth. But then his face hardened again. "I have nothing to say to you. You're just my family's employee. Mind your own business." "Brian, if you're in trouble, I can help. You don't have to destroy your father's company to solve whatever it is." "I told you to mind your own business," he shouted, standing up abruptly. "If you keep bothering me, I'll have my father fire you." Margaret watched him stomp out of the room like a spoiled child. But she had seen something in his eyes that convinced her. Brian was hiding something very serious. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, Margaret worked late. She had managed to correct all the calculation errors, and the results were perfect. But she still needed to uncover the truth about the sabotage. That's when she found something that shocked her. Hidden in a folder of temporary files were bank transfer records. Brian had been embezzling money from the company for over 2 years. They weren't small amounts. They added up to nearly $3 million. And worst of all, the money was being used to cover gambling debts. Brian had a serious gambling problem and was trying to hide it from his father by sabotaging the company so no one would discover the theft. Margaret stayed up all night, thinking about what to do. She could simply hand the evidence over to Richard and be done with it. But she had known that family for 15 years. She knew how much Richard loved his son. She knew Brian had been troubled since he was a teenager, but she never imagined it would come to this. The next morning, she decided to give the young man one last chance. She waited for him to wake up and asked to speak privately. "Brian, I know everything." "What are you talking about?" "The gambling, the debts, the money you stole from the company." Brian turned as white as the wall. His legs trembled and he had to lean on the table to keep from falling. I found the transfer records. $3 million in 2 years. You're addicted to gambling and you're destroying your father's company to hide it." Tears began streaming down the young man's face. All his arrogance and defiance disappeared, leaving only a desperate, terrified young man. "Margaret, please. If my father finds out, he'll kill me. He'll find out one way or another, Brian. The question is, will he hear it from me or from you?" "I can't tell him. I can't." "Why not?" Because he trusts me. I'm all he has in life. If he knows I betrayed that trust, he'll hate me forever." Margaret pitied him, but she knew she couldn't let it slide. "Brian, you're slowly killing your father. He thinks he's losing his mind because he can't figure out where the mistake is. He's blaming himself, losing sleep, ruining his health. I know that, Brian cried desperately. But I can't stop. Every time I win a little from gambling, I think I can pay it all back and no one will find out. But then I lose even more and I get more desperate. You need professional help, Brian. Gambling addiction is a serious illness. My father will never accept that. To him, addiction is a lack of character, moral weakness. He'll kick me out of the house, disown me, ruin me. Margaret fell silent for a few minutes, thinking. She knew Richard well enough to know his first reaction would indeed be anger and disappointment. But she also knew that deep down, he loved his son above all else. Brian, I'm giving you 24 hours. If you don't tell your father the truth by this time tomorrow, I will. Margaret, please. No, Brian. Enough. 15 years working in this house, watching your father work himself to the bone to build a legacy for you, and you're throwing it all away. I won't be an accomplice to this. The young man left the room in tears. Margaret watched from the window as he got into his car and sped away. She hoped he'd use those hours to think and make the right decision. But the 24 hours passed and Brian said nothing to his father. In fact, he didn't even come home. Richard was worried, calling his son's phone with no answer. Margaret, have you seen Brian today? I saw him this morning. He left and never came back. That's not like him. He always tells me when he's traveling or staying out. Margaret knew she couldn't wait any longer. She prepared a full report with all the evidence she'd found and asked Richard to sit down. Mr. Richard, I need to talk to you about something very serious. If it's about the company issue, go ahead. Did you solve it? I solved the mathematical part, but I discovered something much worse in the process. She handed him the report. Richard began reading with interest, but soon his expression shifted to confusion, then shock, and finally to a mix of anger and despair. This can't be true. I'm afraid it is, Mr. Richard. Brian has been embezzling money from the company for 2 years to pay off gambling debts. Richard kept reading, his hands trembling. Margaret saw the exact moment he grasped the scale of the problem. His face turned red, then pale, and she feared he might have a heart attack. $3 million, he murmured as if he couldn't believe it. I'm so sorry, Mr. Richard. I know how much this must hurt. He's my only son, Margaret. Everything I built was for him, and he was stealing from me. He's sick, Mr. Richard. Gambling addiction is a serious illness that needs treatment. Illness? Richard exploded in anger. That's not illness, it's dishonesty. It's rotten character. How could he do this to me? Margaret let him vent. She knew it was necessary. The anger and disappointment had to come out before reflection could follow. And where is he now? Why isn't he here explaining himself? I spoke to him yesterday. I gave him 24 hours to tell you the truth. He chose to run. Run? What do you mean, run? He hasn't come home since yesterday morning. Richard fell silent for several minutes, taking it all in. Then he abruptly stood and began pacing the room. I'll sue him. I'll make him pay back every cent, even if he has to sell a kidney. Mr. Richard, no. Don't try to talk me out of it. He betrayed me in the worst possible way. He's your son. He was my son. Now I don't even know what he is. Richard stormed out, slamming the door. Margaret was left alone, worried about both men. The father was shattered by betrayal, and the son was nowhere to be found, likely desperate and thinking of doing something foolish. She decided to try to find Brian. She called a few of his friends she knew, but no one had seen him. Then she remembered a detail. Years ago, when Brian was a teenager and fought with his father, he always hid at a small inn in Malibu. It was a simple place Richard never imagined his son knew. Margaret took the bus and went there. Finding the inn wasn't easy, but after asking around she managed, and there was Brian's car parked out front. She knocked on the room door and heard the young man's voice asking who it was. It's me, Margaret. He opened the door with red, tear-filled eyes. The room was a mess, empty liquor bottles scattered across the floor. How did you find me? Remember when you were 16 and fought with your father over that girlfriend he didn't approve of? You hid here for 3 days. Brian gave a sad smile. You always paid attention to everything, didn't you? It's my job to take care of this family, Brian, and that includes you. Did you already tell him everything? I did. He was furious, deeply hurt. But deep down, he still loves you. He doesn't love me anymore. He'll never forgive me. You don't know your father like I do. He's wounded, but he hasn't stopped loving you. Brian collapsed onto the bed, defeated. Margaret, I ruined everything. I can't stop gambling. Every time I see a game, a bet, it's stronger than me. And when I lose, I get desperate to win the money back. It's a vicious cycle with no end. There is an end, but you need to accept help. What kind of help? Medical treatment, support groups, therapy. There are places that specialize in gambling addiction. And my father, he'll never accept me getting treatment. To him, that's admitting weakness. Let me handle your father. You focus on getting help. Brian stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. Why are you helping me, Margaret? After everything I've done, you should hate me. I've known you since you were 13, Brian. I watched you grow up, study, graduate. I know deep down you're a good kid who lost his way. But I betrayed my father's trust. I stole money from the company. I nearly destroyed everything. And now you'll make it right. It won't be easy, it'll be painful, but it's possible. Margaret managed to convince Brian to go back home and face the situation. The ride back was silent, both lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the mansion, Richard was in the living room drinking whiskey and staring blankly at the wall. When he saw his son enter, he stood abruptly. Where have you been? Dad, I'm so sorry. You're sorry. You stole $3 million from my company, and all you can say is you're sorry. Brian began to cry. Dad, I know I messed up. I know there's no excuse. But I'm sick, Dad. I can't stop gambling. Sick? That's a pathetic excuse. It's not an excuse, Brian shouted desperately. It's the truth. Every time I see a game, an online bet, it's like I have no control over myself. Richard looked at his son with a mix of anger and sorrow. Do you know what this means, Brian? Do you know what you've done to me? I do, Dad, and I'll pay back every cent, even if it takes years. How? How will you pay back $3 million? I don't know yet, but I'll find a way. I'll sell everything I have, I'll work day and night, but I'll pay it back. Richard stared at his son silently for several minutes. Margaret could see the internal battle between his anger and paternal love. You betrayed my trust in the worst possible way, Brian. I know, Dad. You nearly destroyed the company I built with your future in mind. I know. And on top of that, you made me spend months thinking I was going crazy because I couldn't find the error in the accounts. Brian lowered his head, unable to meet his father's eyes. But, Richard continued, his voice trembling, you're still my son, and I still love you, even if I want to strangle you right now. Brian looked up, surprised. Dad? Margaret explained to me about gambling addiction, said it's an illness that needs treatment. Is that true? Yes, Dad. It's not a lack of character. It's a compulsion I can't control on my own. Richard sank heavily onto the couch. Fine, you'll get treatment. I'll pay for the best program in the country, but under some conditions. Anything, Dad. Anything. First, you'll be removed from any role in the company until you're fully healed. Second, you'll return every penny you stole, even if it takes the rest of your life. Third, you'll attend therapy and support groups for as long as necessary. Brian agreed to everything, crying with relief. And the fourth condition, Richard continued, you'll apologize to Margaret. If it weren't for her, I'd never have discovered the truth and you'd have kept stealing from me until everything was ruined. Brian turned to Margaret, who stood near the door. Margaret, I'm so sorry. Sorry for everything. For treating you poorly, for trying to sabotage your work, for disrespecting you. You're an amazing person and I was an idiot. You're forgiven, Brian. Now focus on healing. That night, the family talked late into the evening. Richard wanted to understand how it all began. When Brian developed his addiction, why he hadn't asked for help sooner. It was a painful but necessary conversation. Margaret watched from a distance, happy to see father and son reconnecting despite the betrayal. She knew rebuilding trust would take time, but at least they were willing to try. The next day, Richard kept his promise and transferred $800,000 into Margaret's account. Mr. Richard, this is too much money. It's what I promised. You solved the problem, uncovered the sabotage, and saved my family. You deserve every penny. But what will I do with so much money? Whatever you want. Buy a house, travel the world, retire. Margaret spent days thinking about what to do with the fortune. She could retire and live comfortably for the rest of her life. But there was something she'd always dreamed of doing since leaving university. A week later, she approached Richard with a proposal. Mr. Richard, I'd like to use part of this money to open a math school for underprivileged youth. A school? Yes. I've always dreamed of teaching again, but for children who lack opportunities. I want to use my experience to help young people build a better future. Richard was moved by the idea. Margaret, that's wonderful. Where do you plan to open this school? Right here in Beverly Hills, there are many underserved communities nearby that could benefit. Count on my help. I can donate land, construction materials, equipment. You don't have to, Mr. Richard. You've already done so much for me. No, Margaret, I insist. It's my way of apologizing for all the years I treated you as if you were invisible, and also a way to teach Brian the true value of people. Margaret accepted his help, and the two began planning the school. Brian, who had started treatment for his gambling addiction, asked to join the project as a way to give his life purpose. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Construction took 6 months. During that time, Brian showed a dedication that surprised his father. He worked on site daily, assisting builders, carrying materials, painting walls. The physical labor seemed to help him manage his anxiety and gambling urges. Brian has changed, Margaret remarked to Richard one afternoon. He has. I've never seen him so focused on something that wasn't for his own benefit. Volunteer work is therapeutic. It helps people realize there are things more important than their own struggles. Margaret, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why did you never remarry after your husband passed? The question caught Margaret off guard. She was silent for a moment before answering. Anthony was the love of my life, Mr. Richard. We were married for 35 years when he passed. I've tried to move on with other people, but it was never the same. I think some people only truly love once in their lifetime. And you don't feel lonely? Sometimes I do. But I have my projects, my dreams, and now I have this school to keep me busy. You're an admirable woman, Margaret. It took me 15 years to realize it, but you're truly special. Thank you, Mr. Richard. That means a lot to me. The school was completed early the following year. Margaret had hired other volunteer teachers, all retirees eager to share their knowledge. The curriculum included not just math, but also English, science, and basic computer skills. On opening day, over 200 people from the community attended. Richard gave an emotional speech about the importance of education and how the most valuable lessons often come from the people we least expect. This school exists thanks to an extraordinary woman who worked in my home for 15 years, he said, looking at Margaret. A woman I underestimated, a woman I failed to appreciate, but who taught me the most important lesson of my life. Never judge someone by their appearance or social standing. Brian also gave a short speech, sharing his struggles with addiction and how volunteering had helped him heal. I was a lost young man who only thought of myself, he said. But Margaret showed me there's something more important than our own problems, helping others live better lives. The school opened with 60 students, children and teens aged 8 to 17. Margaret taught advanced math to the older students, while other instructors handled beginner classes. Within weeks, she noticed exceptional potential in some of them. Marcus, a 12-year-old boy whose mother was a housekeeper, solved equations she'd only seen in college. Jennifer, a 15-year-old girl, had an incredible knack for geometry. These kids need special opportunities, Margaret told Richard. They have the talent to go far. What do you suggest? Scholarships to private schools? College prep? Maybe even study abroad someday? Consider it done. I'll set up a special fund for the most gifted students. Word of the school spread quickly. Soon, reporters wanted to cover the story of the housekeeper who became an educator. Margaret disliked the attention, but agreed, knowing publicity would bring more donations and volunteers. In one interview, she spoke about the importance of not underestimating people. For 15 years, I was treated as if I were invisible, as if my only purpose was to clean and cook. But I carried knowledge with me that could have been useful much sooner if anyone had bothered to talk to me about more than just a grocery list. The interview went viral, sparking debates about class prejudice and how society wastes talent because of stereotypes. A few months after the school opened, Margaret received an unexpected call. A TV producer wanted to make a documentary about her life. "I'm not sure it's a good idea," she told Richard. "I don't want this to become a spectacle." "It could be a chance to inspire others, Margaret. How many housekeepers out there have college degrees and no one knows?" "That's true. Maybe it's important to show that competence isn't about a work uniform." She agreed to participate in the documentary, which aired a few months later to great audience success. The program showcased not only Margaret's story, but also those of other domestic workers with higher education who had ended up in the profession out of necessity. The impact was enormous. Margaret began receiving letters from people across the country sharing similar stories. Some were housekeepers with degrees in engineering, medicine, or law. Others were teachers who had become drivers or nurses working as security guards. "This is more common than we think," Margaret told Richard. "America wastes so much talent because of the economic crisis and social prejudice. What can we do to change this?" "We're already doing it. This school is a start, but we need more initiatives like this." Richard became increasingly involved in the educational project. He used his influence in the business world to secure donations and partnerships. Soon, Margaret's school had branches in other cities across the metropolitan area. Brian, who had fully recovered from his gambling addiction through treatment and volunteer work, decided to study education to become an official teacher at the school. "I want to help young people who are lost like I was," he told his father. "I want to show them it's always possible to start over." Richard was proud of his son's transformation. The young man who once only cared about money and bets was now dedicating his life to helping others. "Margaret worked a miracle in our family," he told his wife, who had returned from a trip abroad and was amazed by the changes. "She didn't work any miracle," replied Patricia, Richard's wife. "She just showed you who you really are when you stop thinking only about yourselves." A year after the school's opening, something happened that deeply moved Margaret. Marcus, the 12-year-old boy she had identified as gifted, was accepted into one of the best private schools in New York City with a full scholarship. "Mrs. Margaret," he said on his last day of class, "you changed my life. If it weren't for you, I'd still think math was only for rich people." "Marcus, the talent was always inside you. I just helped you discover it. When I grow up, I want to be a mathematician like you. You'll be much better than me, young man, I'm sure of it." At the school's one-year anniversary celebration, Richard gave another heartfelt speech. "2 years ago, I was an arrogant man who judged people by appearances. I thought financial success meant intellectual superiority, but a wise woman taught me that intelligence knows no social class, dignity isn't measured by salary, and sometimes the greatest lessons come from the humblest people." He looked at Margaret seated in the front row with her students. "Margaret Wilson is no longer my housekeeper. She is my life teacher, my friend, and the person who saved my family from ruin. Today I can proudly say I've learned to see people's true worth." The audience gave a standing ovation. Margaret stood up and hugged Richard, moved. "Thank you for giving me the chance to show who I really am," she whispered in his ear. "Thank you for being patient with me all these years," he replied. Brian also stepped forward and hugged them both. "Thank you for saving me from myself," he said. In that moment, Margaret felt her life was complete. She had proven that competence has nothing to do with social standing, saved a family from destruction, and fulfilled her dream of teaching again. A few years later, the network of schools founded by Margaret served over 1,000 students across 10 cities. Dozens of former students had secured scholarships at public and private universities. 3 of them had already graduated in engineering and returned to teach as volunteers. Richard transformed his company into one of the biggest supporters of public education in the state. Brian became a respected educator, and wrote a book about his experience with gambling addiction that helped thousands of people. Margaret, at 70 years old, continued teaching and mentoring new teachers. She had become a national reference in mathematics education for underprivileged youth. In an interview for an education magazine, she said, "People always ask me if I resent the years I spent being underestimated. The answer is no. Those years taught me humility, patience, and how to value every opportunity. Without them, I might not be the educator I am today." And what advice would you give to others who feel invisible in society? Never give up on proving your worth. Keep studying, even if no one acknowledges it. Maintain your dignity even in the toughest situations. And remember, everyone has something valuable to offer the world, no matter their social standing. Margaret's main school became a model for similar initiatives across the country. The Margaret Method, as it came to be known, combined academic excellence with personal development, teaching students that knowledge comes with social responsibility. On her last day working as a housekeeper in Richard's home, 5 years after solving the company's problem, Margaret insisted on cleaning everything one final time. "You don't have to do that," Richard said. "You're not an employee here anymore." "I know, but I want to leave everything tidy for whoever comes after me. It's also my way of closing this chapter with care." She stored the green uniform in the closet and put on a navy blue dress. On her way out, she took one last look at the mansion where she had spent 15 years of her life. "Will you miss it?" Richard asked. "I'll miss the people, not the place, but I'm happy because I know I'm leaving you all better than I found you." "Did we make you better too?" Margaret smiled. "You gave me back my dignity, my purpose, and my joy for life. I'd say we made a good deal." At the graduation ceremony for the school's first full class, Margaret was honored with the Educator of the Year award by the state government. In her acceptance speech, she said, "This award isn't mine. It belongs to all the housekeepers, doormen, janitors, security guards, and invisible workers who carry dreams and talents hidden behind their uniforms. It's for everyone who was ever underestimated, but never stopped believing in their potential." The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Among the applause, Margaret saw Richard and Brian in the front row, tears of emotion and pride in their eyes. "Professor," said Jennifer, a former student now studying engineering at MIT, "you changed our lives, but did you change yours too?" "I did, dear. It taught me it's never too late to start over, that knowledge only has value when shared, and that life's greatest victories are the ones that include others." "And what would you do differently if you could go back in time?" Margaret thought for a few seconds before answering, "Nothing. Every moment of suffering, every humiliation, every hardship was necessary to shape me into the person I am today. If I hadn't gone through all of it, I might never have discovered my true purpose." 10 years after solving the mathematical problem that changed her life, Margaret Wilson became one of the most respected educators in the country. Her network of schools had expanded to 15 states, serving over 5,000 underprivileged students. Richard Thompson transformed his company into a socially responsible corporation, dedicating part of its profits to educational projects. He and Margaret became partners in dozens of initiatives aimed at reducing social inequality through education. Brian Thompson specialized in therapy for gambling addicts and opened a free clinic that had already helped hundreds of people. He married one of the volunteer teachers at the school and had 2 children who called Margaret Grandma. At Margaret's 80th birthday celebration, held in the gymnasium of the main school, over 1,000 people attended, former students, teachers, volunteers, officials, and friends. The event was live-streamed and watched by thousands who had been inspired by her story. "When I was young," she said in her thank you speech, "I dreamed of being a great mathematician, recognized worldwide for my discoveries. Today I realize I've become something far better, a mentor to great mathematicians, an inspiration to those who felt invisible, and living proof that we should never underestimate human potential." At the end of the party, Richard approached her with an envelope in his hand. "Margaret, I have a special gift for you. Mr. Richard, you've already given me more than I could ever dream of. This is different. Open it. Inside the envelope was the deed to a 10,000 square foot lot in downtown New York City. "It's for the national headquarters of the Margaret Wilson Foundation," he explained, "a training center for volunteer teachers that will spread your method across the country." Margaret was speechless. She hugged Richard with tears in her eyes. "Why do you do all this for me?" "Because you taught me that true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we share. And because I want my grandchildren to live in a world where talent is recognized, regardless of social background." That night, after everyone had left, Margaret stayed alone in the school, gazing at the photos on the wall. Hundreds of smiling faces of students who had passed through those halls. Each one represented a life transformed, a dream fulfilled, a family with renewed hope. She thought back to the day Richard slammed the laptop on the kitchen table and shouted that he'd pay $800,000 if she solved the problem. At that moment, she could never have imagined that challenge would change not just her life, but the lives of thousands. "Thank you, Anthony," she whispered, looking at the photo of her husband she kept on her desk. "I know you'd be proud of me." A gentle breeze drifted through the window, rustling the leaves of the plants. Margaret smiled, feeling a deep peace in her heart. She had proven that competence knows no social class, that dignity can't be bought with money, and that life's greatest treasures are the people we touch and transform along the way. The end of the story. Now tell me, dear listener, what did you think of this inspiring story? Do you know someone who's been underestimated because of their appearance or profession? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.